Are you feeling depressed? Well, today's episode of Weird Moments in Beatles history is guaranteed to cheer you up. It's not about some grand mystery or lost footage, but it is a great story that really just captures a moment in time for John Lennon and George Harrison, a day in the life, if you will. March 23rd, 1965. Photographer Henry Grossman has a sweet gig lined up. Just a few weeks earlier, he was in Austria with the Beatles while they filmed Help. And if you've seen my video about the infamous drunken gig, I think it's safe to say that Grossman had gotten pretty close with the band at this point. Just a week prior to this story, he'd been enjoying a beer fest with the band in Austria. And I obviously can't say this for certain because I never met him, but Grossman seems like he was an awesome dude, and I can kind of see why the Beatles liked him. I've looked at a lot of Beatles photos, but it seems like the ones that Grossman took are just special. They're a lot more fun, and it always seems like he captured the Beatles having a great time. Sure looks like Ringo's having a good time. What I can say for certain is that Henry Grossman was an awesome photographer who had a hell of a career, which included taking some of the best photos of the Beatles between 1964 and 1968. It's not like he just photographed the Beatles for just a few lucky gigs, though. This guy shot over 6,000 photos of the Beatles in total, and if there's a Beatles poster that you have hanging up on the wall, there's a pretty good chance he took the picture. And I'd feel bad for at least not mentioning this, but trust me when I say that Henry Grossman had a seriously impressive portfolio. Anyway, he was snapping photos with them throughout the filming of Help, and while the Beatles were in Austria, Grossman also took a bunch of other photos, including these pictures of Ringo and Maureen in their hotel room. George Harrison was impressed, and he made sure to tell Grossman that when they get back from filming, he wants him to come over and take similar pictures of him and Pattie together. Which leads us to March 23rd, 1965. Grossman shows up to Harrison's house, which is Kinfauns, a big bungalow that Harrison lived in from 1964 to 1970. It was in Esher, a suburb of London, but unfortunately it got demolished in 2003. Seriously, what are historical societies even for anyway? Anyway, Grossman arrives at the residence, and to his surprise, John and Cynthia are there. Grossman snaps this photo of Pattie, Cynthia, and George sitting around the coffee table. John and Cynthia are actually about to head home, but John asks Grossman if he can come over that afternoon and do a session with him too. And of course Henry Grossman says yes, because what photographer wouldn't, right? Grossman then proceeds to take several now famous photos of George and Pattie together, and like any smart photographer, he also brings along color film. He also takes a few photos of George, but George is more interested in showing off his cars, specifically this gorgeous Aston Martin DB5, and if you're a movie fan, you'll know that this is the James Bond car in Goldfinger. There is no question in my mind why George Harrison purchased it. Looking at these photos from earlier in the year, it's pretty clear that George Harrison was a fan. Grossman takes a few more photos of George with his precious Aston Martin, and then, get this, George says he'll drive him over to John's house. Despite having a number of luxury vehicles to choose from, including the Aston Martin he just posed with, Harrison proceeds to instead pull out his Austin Mini, and then tells Grossman to get in the back. My guess is that Harrison kept a more low-key car for driving in public. Grossman hops into the back of the car, probably because Pattie is in the front passenger seat, for the fairly short drive to John's house. Grossman actually recalled later that he was not comfortable for the ride over. Grossman then captures what might be the most unique Beatles photo ever taken, George Harrison acting as your personal chauffeur. They get to John's house, George having apparently driven over in sandals, and they proceed to just hang out. In this bizarrely normal set of photos, they chill with the cat, mess with shit around the house that probably doesn't need fixing, play with the kids and tell some jokes, put on some TV in the background and play guitar, that sort of stuff. And of course, because this is a guitar-themed channel, I'll point out that this is one of the rare times that you see the famous hootenanny in photos outside of that scene in the Help movie and a few random shots during the Rubber Soul sessions. Unfortunately, John Lennon only had this guitar for this 1 year, 1965, and I've actually got a whole video coming up about that, so stay tuned, or check the description if you're from the future. John and George also do a bit of jamming themselves, and another rare guitar makes its appearance. Unless I'm mistaken, that distinctive rounded bridge and unique headstock shape points to one thing. This would be George's Ramirez classical guitar, the same one that you see him playing in the Hard Day's Night movie. The, let's see if I can say this, guitarra de estudio. Not too shabby. So either George left his guitar at John's house, or he's the kind of friend that always brings a guitar everywhere with him. Actually, maybe that's why Grossman was so crowded in the back seat. Grossman also manages to capture a rare side of John Lennon, the family man, something not often seen, especially during this period. Without bringing any controversy into it, I think we can all agree it's just nice to see John playing with Julian and doing normal dad stuff. Grossman, of course, followed through with the impromptu photo shoot agreement and captured several very nice photos of John and Cynthia together. He also made a point to include Julian in some of these photos, again in black and white and in color, and he captured this genuinely heartwarming photo of George, Julian, and John all together. To end this episode, I will just say that Henry Grossman is a legend who lived a photographer's dream. He met the Beatles during the Ed Sullivan Show, captured private moments backstage during the hectic touring years of Beatlemania, witnessed moments in musical history during the Beatles' most reclusive period, and composed some of the most famous Beatles images of all time. As Paul McCartney said, the Beatles had lots of photographs taken of them. Occasionally, one of the photographers would be out of the ordinary. Henry Grossman was one such photographer. Plus, he's a good guy.